In an uncharted northern region of South Korea, a group of explorers gathers around a flickering fire, the cold air thick with tension. Among them, one man stands out, his nervous posture betraying his unease. Though experienced in navigating gates and dungeons, the mysteries of unexplored lands weigh heavily on him. Around him, hushed voices murmur warnings of monsters long forgotten, of ancient horrors lurking beneath untouched soil. At the heart of the expedition is Lee Chul, the ninth illegitimate son of the prestigious Marshal Lee clan. His presence alone sparks quiet doubt among the team. Once cast aside by his family, his name is spoken with disdain. Weak, talentless, and unworthy of his bloodline. A mere 7th-ranked martial artist, far past the age of greatness, he is hardly the leader anyone would trust in such perilous terrain. Yet, under the watchful eyes of the Shadow Sword Squad, his every step seems dictated by unseen forces, bound by a mission he cannot refuse. Long ago, hope had ignited within him when the highest-ranked weapon at the Steel Selection Ritual had chosen him. He had dared to believe that if he persevered, if he earned recognition, he might carve a place within the clan's legacy. But fate had other plans. A doctor's grim assessment shattered his dreams. His monopaths were beyond repair, his body unfit for magic, his martial arts unstable at best. Reaching the 9th rank, they said, would be nothing short of a miracle. The moment his condition became known, his so-called destiny was dismissed as a fluke. His achievements were ridiculed. Still, he fought against his fate, pushing himself to the limits. By 25, he reached the 7th rank, a milestone that brought him fleeting joy. But it was a hollow victory. His siblings had surpassed that level as mere children. His struggle, no matter how relentless, would never be enough. Exiled at 30, his existence was reduced to that of a wandering outcast, clinging to survival. If not for his eldest brother, he would have left the household as a corpse. For 10 years he roamed, his name fading into obscurity, overshadowed by the rise of new martial prodigies. Meanwhile, the world plunged into chaos, unexplored territories expanded, and monstrous invasions became more frequent. The death of his father, the legendary sword Saint Li Taixin, marked the end of an era. The news struck him like a bitter wind, delivered to him by a crumpled newspaper carried on the breeze. Yet, grief had no time to settle before the Shadow Sword Squad appeared before him, their arrival a chilling omen. They spoke only of orders, a decree from the new patriarch, Gunsong, his 3rd brother. His bloodline, it seemed, would never loosen its grip on him. With no choice but to comply, Chul found himself dragged back into the clan's affairs. The mission was simple in words, yet laced with foreboding. Investigate the unexplored regions. But the purpose behind it remained a mystery. What of his eldest brother? Why was he truly being sent here? And why, after a decade without wielding a sword, was he still expected to fight? Now, in the present, unease grips the team as they stumble upon an abandoned yet eerily pristine structure in the heart of the forest. The air is thick with unspoken dread as they advance, their eyes locking onto an enormous skull embedded in the earth. A remnant of an ancient monster, its presence confirms the whispered legends of horrors lurking beyond civilization's grasp. Without warning, chaos erupts. The nervous explorer is the first to fall, his head severed in an instant before his question can leave his lips. Panic surges through the group as the Shadow Sword Squad moves with ruthless precision. The truth is laid bare in blood. The expedition was never meant to return. They had been marked for death from the very start. As Chul turns in shock, fury burns within him. The mission, the orders, the clan's twisted sense of honor, none of it mattered now. In the face of betrayal, only one truth remains: survival. The blade was just inches away from its target when a sudden piercing pain tore through his chest. A sword had run him through from behind. His breath hitched, his fingers clenched the hilt of his own weapon, but his strength was already failing. Behind him Chul stood, his face cold and unreadable. He demanded answers, and the Shadow Sword Squad crumbled under the weight of their own cowardice. Their liege had given the order. They were to bring them all here and execute them, cleanly, if possible. Chul's expression darkened, his grip tightened, and with a single, effortless motion, he shattered the blade still embedded in his back. The shards clattered to the ground, glistening with his blood. But his wounds, they were already closing, the flesh knitting together before his very eyes. Bewildered, he barely had time to react before another enemy lunged at him. The fool misread the moment, thinking he had an opening. Instead, he was cleaved in half, his body hitting the ground in two uneven pieces. Chul barely dodged in time, the attack missing him by a hair's breadth. Laughter echoed around him, sharp and mocking. They taunted him, calling him weak, a disgrace to his lineage. He had Lee blood in his veins, yet he was nothing more than a disappointment. One of them surged forward, driving a knee into Chul's chest. A sickening crunch followed as he was sent hurtling backward, colliding with debris, shattering stone, before slamming into the remains of a giant skeleton. Blood spilled from his lips as he struggled to draw breath. Pain seared through him, but he gritted his teeth. He would not die like this, not like a dog in the dirt. He forced himself to move, eyes darting around for a weapon. Then he saw it, embedded deep in the skull of the monstrous skeleton. A blade, forgotten by time. If it was strong enough to bring down that beast, then it was strong enough for him. With trembling fingers, he reached for it. The moment his hands closed around the hilt, a wave of power surged through him. He pulled, the sword sliding free, but before he could savor his victory, the weapon dissolved into black mist. His breath hitched. Why? Why was this happening? A voice rasped behind him, cold, cruel. A shadow sword member sneered at him, mocking his weakness. A failure of the Lee clan. He would at least be sent off like one. The blade came down, slicing open Chul's back. Agony exploded through him. He staggered, vision swimming, thoughts unraveling. Was this it? Was this truly how it ended? A life spent running, struggling, grasping for something just beyond his reach. He had fought, clawed his way forward, only to meet nothing but failure. He cursed the heavens. If only he had one more chance. Darkness swallowed him whole. Then, a voice. Familiar. His father's. He spoke of his mother, Yejung, and the butler's reply was solemn. They had found her too late. Chul's mind reeled. His father? But he was gone. This didn't make sense, and then he saw him. Taishan, standing there, alive, younger than he remembered, and Butler Choi, he too looked untouched by time. Chul's breath caught as realization clawed its way into his mind. He glanced down, his hands, small, plump, like a child's. He looked again, heart pounding. He should be dead. He was dead. Was this the afterlife? A vision? Taishan's voice cut through his thoughts, giving orders. Like the other children, Chul was to be assigned a handmaid, guards from the Shadow Sword Squad, and prepared for the steel selection ritual alongside the 8th child. Butler Choi hesitated. Chul wasn't ready. The 8th was older. Taishan dismissed the concern. It didn't matter. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Chul alone in his crib. He let out a slow breath. His father hadn't changed. That suffocating presence, the weight of his words. It had been so long, but even now, it crushed him. This wasn't a memory. This wasn't a dream. If it was real, then there was only one answer. He had gone back. Back to the past. Months passed. The day had come. The steel selection ritual, a tradition of the clan. The children would stand before the sacred weapons, waiting to see which would choose them. It was a test of fate, of worth. His father had been chosen by dozens of blades, rising to become the greatest swordsman of his generation. His eldest brother, blessed by swords, tomes, and a staff, had mastered both magic and the blade. And now, it was Chul's turn. Dressed in fine robes, he stood in the grand hall. A maid murmured about how well-behaved he was, how he didn't cry despite the overwhelming environment. Unlike the others, he was composed, mature. Beside him, his personal handmaid, Mungawa, smiled warmly. She had faith in him. She believed he had a bright future. In his past life, she had been the only one who truly cared for him, but she had been cast out, discarded because of his brother's hatred. The only person who had wept for him, the only one who had seen his suffering. Not this time. He reached up, touching her face. Then, without thinking, he hugged her tightly. This time he would protect her, no matter what. A voice called out, signaling that the preparations were complete. Gawa looked down at him, asking if he was ready. He nodded. Butler Choi reported to Taishan, who simply nodded. It was time. Chul, Gawa, and the 8th child followed behind Taishan and Butler Choi. Step by step, they ascended the grand staircase, bathed in a blinding light as they emerged into the stadium. A roar of voices greeted them. The crowd was hungry, eager to see the next generation's potential. Then, the whispers started. Eyes turned to him. The bastard son. The outsider. Seated in the highest seats, the matriarch Baekueon observed with cold scrutiny. Beside her, the minister Lee Tae-hong sat unreadable. And then, there was Mung Jin, the first son. Gun Song too. Chul had not forgotten their faces. His past self had stood here once before. Weak, helpless. But this time would be different. A sharp snap echoed through the air, and just like that, everything shifted. Weapons trembled, rising from the ground as if answering a silent call. At the center of it all stood Taishin, his gaze sharp, his presence undeniable. The floating blades shimmered in the dim light, their edges whispering of battles long past. A moment passed before Chul was lifted off the ground as well, weightless, like a puppet in the hands of fate. He was placed gently before the sea of weapons, the silent steel standing in judgment. This wasn't how it had happened before. He knew that. The past life, the failure, the rejection, it all felt like a distant nightmare. But here he was, with a second chance, an opportunity to rewrite his fate. No hesitation. He crawled forward, the rough ground scraping against his palms as he passed by relics of legend. Each weapon hummed with history. Frak, the dragon slayer, its blade once bathed in the blood of ancient serpents. A spear forged from the very bones of a saint, radiating with holy energy. Every weapon was a masterpiece, a legacy of the greatest warriors before him. And yet he passed them all. His hand stretched forward, drawn to something that had been long forgotten. A sword lay beneath a thick layer of dust, its presence so unremarkable that it might as well have been invisible. Black twilight. A blade wrapped in obscurity, dismissed by generations, abandoned by warriors who sought power in more obvious places. It was an enigma, a blade of unknown origins, and no ancestor had ever wielded it. A mistake? A meaningless choice? Perhaps. But Chul didn't waver. His fingers brushed against the hilt, and for the first time, something stirred within. Taishin watched in silence, his sharp eyes narrowing. Of all the weapons, the boy had chosen that one. An eerie stillness filled the air. No one understood the sword's power, if it even had any, and yet as Chul lifted it, something about the moment felt final. Taishin raised the blade high, his voice ringing through the chamber. The ritual was complete. 9 years later, the past had faded, replaced by a world that had moved forward without hesitation. Chul stood tall, his once frail body hardened by years of training. He called out to Gawa, informing her of his afternoon training. She, ever the warrior, insisted on escorting him. He dismissed her concerns, but she was unrelenting. The training ground stretched wide before them, split into different zones, each representing a different stage of mastery. The silence was broken by a sharp voice, harsh and demanding. A young girl, barely older than Chul, flinched under the weight of her instructor's words. "Wah!" The 8th child. She threw her sword to the ground in frustration, her breath ragged. The man before her was relentless. Baek Lee Hyun, commander of the Ebony Squad. His skills were undeniable, his presence imposing. Chul watched from the sidelines, unimpressed. To him, these people had always been wrapped in the comforts of privilege. Their struggles, their ambitions, they meant nothing to him. He had carved his own path, one forged in exile and solitude. Gawa, misunderstanding his silence, tried to comfort him, her voice laced with guilt. He stopped her before she could go further. He had no time for pity. Zone 1. The training ground reserved for the elite, now reduced to a relic of the past. It wasn't used anymore, not for real training, but Chul had his reasons for coming. The heavy doors groaned as he pushed them open. The air inside was thick with dust, the scent of aged steel and forgotten battles clinging to every corner. Rows upon rows of weapons lined the walls, relics cast aside by warriors who had long since moved on. He ran his fingers over the hilts, stopping at one in particular. This would do. He exhaled slowly, widening his stance, the weight of the sword settling comfortably in his grip. Something had changed in him since his regression, something even he couldn't fully understand. As he channeled his aura into the blade, his vision blurred. Shadows twisted, memories whispering from within the steel itself. A voice rang out, distant yet clear. A man's voice, a teacher, a warrior. His words echoed in Chul's mind, pressing into his very soul. On the basics, the path to mastery begins at the foundation. Chul's grip tightened. His fate had already been decided once. This time, he would carve a new one. A single motion shattered the silence. The weight of steel rose, trembling as if awakened from a slumber centuries deep. Chul stood in the center, his breath steady, his focus unbreakable. Around him, weapons hovered, shadows of legends past, blades that had tasted war and carried the burdens of those before him. A presence deeper than memory lingered in their edges, whispering through the air, clawing at the veil between past and present. He had trained for 2 years, cutting through exhaustion, drowning in the memories of these weapons. The stronger the wielder's bond, the clearer the echoes of their past. He had seen victories carved in blood, defeats that shattered souls, warriors who rose and those who fell, leaving nothing behind but the steel they once carried. Every weapon in this hall, he had touched its history, breathed its struggles, devoured its lessons. Now, his movements carried that weight. 7-star sword, first form, crimson wind. The blade cut through air, fierce and fluid, igniting the space around him. The form was complete, perfected through endless nights and relentless will. His body no longer hesitated, the blade no longer resisted. He had become the technique itself. A slow, deliberate clap broke the trance. Laughter followed, deep, familiar, and laced with approval. Tai Hong. Chul turned, watching the man step into the room, the shadows bending around his presence. A warrior, a general, a man whose name carried weight even among their kind. Though not of the direct line, his strength had been acknowledged, and more than that, he was one of the few who had ever looked after him, both in this life and the last. He greeted his uncle, only for Tai Hong to ruffle his hair like he was still a child. Pride flickered in his eyes as he spoke, mentioning how he saw him here every morning and night, never faltering. The family's scorn, the whispers of his siblings, it must have been unbearable. Yet, he endured. Chul straightened. He wasn't a man who bowed to pity. The bloodline demanded proof, not words, and he would carve his place with the edge of his sword. Tai Hong studied him. There was something in his expression, something almost regretful. Why did he have to be born an illegitimate child? The world had already decided his worth before he could prove himself. And now, he was nearing the age of his naming ceremony. Tai Hong made his offer. He wanted to teach him. For a moment, the world stood still. But Chul shook his head. Rules bound him tighter than chains. The naming ceremony dictated that he could not take a teacher before it was complete. He would not break that rule, no matter how much the others did. His path was his own, and he would walk it alone. Tai Hong exhaled, watching him as if seeing something far beyond a mere boy, stubborn, just like his father. He ruffled Chul's hair again, calling it troublesome that he could do nothing for him. But before he left, he asked if there was anything Chul needed. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He smirked. There was something he wanted. Boundless. The secret warehouse. Tai Hong's brows lifted in surprise, but didn't question it, and soon they were on their way. The vehicle cut through the silent night, stopping before a massive tower. The entrance was guarded, its gates looming like an unspoken warning. When asked for identification, Tai Hong handed over his card without hesitation, stating it was a routine check and that he was taking the youngest on a field trip. The guards saluted, granting them entry without question. As they drove inside, Chul played his role, eyes wide with fake wonder. Excitement. Curiosity. Innocence. A child's mask he wore well. Tai Hong chuckled, amused. Chul nodded eagerly, knowing exactly what to say. The secret warehouse was where the family's greatest treasures were stored. Weapons forged in myth, relics that defied reality, and among them, the one he sought. As they ventured deeper, the air thickened with presence. This place, more than any other, held remnants of the past. Weapons so powerful they devoured their wielders, cursed relics that whispered madness into the minds of the weak. Tai Hong gave a warning, but Chul played his part well, feigning fear before dismissing it just as quickly. The elevator doors slid open. Tai Hong stepped inside, telling him to take his time while he handled his business above. As the doors shut, Chul's act dropped. The real hunt began now. The basement. The graveyard of weapons. And within it, Boundless. A weapon like no other. Normally just a simple dagger, but when infused with mana, it defies all logic. Shape, weight, length, every property shifts at will, adapting to the wielder's needs. A weapon of limitless potential, a blade without bounds, boundless. It was this very weapon that had rewritten history. Before his regression, Gunsong had discovered it in the secret warehouse, earning the title Ever-Changing. That name alone had shattered the established order. Despite being the third son, he had usurped the seat of power, becoming the patriarch over the rightful heir. That dagger had reshaped the hierarchy of their bloodline. And with it, he had hunted him down. He had been nothing more than an inconvenience, a loose end, a threat. No matter how small, Gunsong had snuffed him out without hesitation. That was all he remembered before his death. Now, with a second chance, history would not repeat itself. This time, the blade would be his. Dark energy swirled in his palm, pulsing with an eerie familiarity, the same energy that had consumed him in his final moments. He reached out, brushing his fingers against the first dagger he saw. No reaction. Not the one. Again. Again. One after another, he sifted through the countless weapons, his patience stretching thin. An hour passed. Still nothing. He refused to believe it wasn't here. Boundless had to be somewhere in this vault of forgotten relics. He turned toward the display stand, a promising lead, but as he moved, his arm clipped the edge of a nearby table. Something tumbled to the floor, landing with a dull, lifeless clatter. A blade smothered in rust. It was barely recognizable as a weapon, corroded to the point of uselessness. He crouched, running a hand over its decayed surface, wondering how it had even ended up in such a state. Then his body seized. The black aura erupted from his palm, latching onto the dagger, engulfing it entirely. It moved on its own, drawn to the weapon like a predator sinking its teeth into prey. The moment his fingers made contact, his vision collapsed into darkness. When his sight returned, he was somewhere else. A battlefield. No, a graveyard. He stood atop a mountain of corpses, the air thick with the stench of blood and decay. The dead stretched endlessly in every direction. Was this a memory sealed within the blade? No, this was too vivid, too real. His body felt present in this nightmare. Then, a sound. A deep, primal vibration that shook his very core. He turned skyward. Something was watching him. An entity beyond comprehension, a terror so vast that the very earth seemed to shrink beneath its presence. It loomed in the heavens, a monstrous force that had once emerged from the abyss to swallow entire civilizations. A being of apocalypse. His legs trembled. He had no illusions. He would die. No human could stand against this. His instincts screamed for him to flee, but his body had already frozen. Then, footsteps. Slow, steady, unshaken. A man strode past him, clad in battle-worn armor. Without hesitation, he leapt forward, propelled by sheer force, weapon raised overhead. He moved without fear, without hesitation, without doubt. And then he struck. A single blade, a single cut, a single split. A force unlike anything he had ever witnessed carved through the heavens. A detonation so massive that the world itself seemed to recoil. The apocalypse-ranked monster's body was obliterated, its remains scattering like dust. A moment of silence. Then a deluge of blood. It rained down in torrents, soaking the earth in the creature's demise. Chul could only stare, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just witnessed. A strike of that magnitude? Impossible. Who was this man? Then the warrior turned. Their eyes met, and in that instant, a chill gripped Chul's spine. He could see him. He wasn't just an observer in this memory, he was there. The warrior's gaze hardened. His grip tightened on his weapon. He raised it, declaring judgment. A merciful death. The blade descended. Chul's chest tightened, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. And then, darkness! He awoke, gasping for air, drenched in cold sweat. The weapon clattered from his grasp, but the weight of that moment still pressed against his soul. It had felt real. That oppressive presence, the overwhelming pressure, it lingered, crushing him under its phantom grip. Then the dagger began to change. The rust flaked away as if burned from its surface. A faint glow pulsed within the blade, growing stronger, brighter. His breath caught. No doubt remained. This was it. Boundless. He gripped the weapon, slicing his finger. A faint blue light ignited along its edge, growing in intensity, wrapping around the steel like a living force. He raised it high, watching as the blade morphed. A longsword, a curved saber, a short blade. The transformation was seamless, limitless. A smirk played at his lips. It's mine now. Sometime later, sweat dripped from his forehead. His blade slammed against the training dummy, another failure. A week had passed since he had claimed Boundless. He had concealed it, disguising it as a simple ring. No one could suspect what he possessed now. But there was something else, something that still haunted him. The warrior, that strike, the split demon. He had only glimpsed it, yet it had burned into his mind, refusing to fade. That man had shown it to him, given it a name, but deep down, Chul knew. He wasn't ready for it yet. Not yet. But he would be. A year had passed, time slipping away in relentless pursuit of progress. Gawa stormed in, her voice urgent as she called out for Chul. He turned to her, curious about the interruption. Gyanga stood beside him, her presence a constant in his life now. Without a word, Gawa extended a document towards him. His gaze flickered with recognition as he took it, unfolding the paper with measured anticipation. Gyanga peered over his shoulder, questioning its significance. It was finally time. His naming ceremony had been announced. The summons bore the signature of Myeonjong himself. The revelation stirred unease within Chul. Why was Jung acting as the proxy patriarch? His father was absent, but there had been no mention of an expedition. The unanswered questions gnawed at him, but before he could delve deeper, Jianga's expression twisted. A tremor ran through her as she clenched her fists, frustration breaking free in a burst of protest. She had finally grasped the essence of the technique they had been refining, and now, Just when she needed his guidance the most, he was being pulled away. A year had passed since their agreement, and in that time, they had unraveled the secrets of mana manipulation. They had dissected modern techniques that revolved around the mana circle and delved into ancient methods that relied on mana paths. A new fusion had emerged, one that combined both systems into something unprecedented. It had been Gyanga's dream to bring this hybrid technique to life, allowing mana to passively accumulate and transform within the circle, while the paths dictated its flow and control. Yet, despite her protests, Chal knew this was inevitable. The ceremony was a step forward in his path. He reassured her, promising that their work would not be abandoned. His departure would not stretch into an eternity. She looked at him, eyes clouded with something between disbelief and reluctant acceptance. She was unpredictable, always teetering between genius and madness. How could he possibly continue their research while undergoing rigorous training? The answer came with a smirk. He would pursue both simultaneously. The refinement of mana techniques and the revival of ancient arts would not halt. Time passed, and soon he stood within an eerie chamber, encased in a containment field alongside others. A figure loomed over them, the instructor known as Jang Wook, leader of the Blood Tiger Squad. His voice rang through the space, announcing the commencement of training. Their first task, enduring relentless magical attacks for 30 minutes. Arcane energy flared to life, crashing against the protective barriers. Yet, where others trembled, Chal remained composed. The magical onslaught deflected harmlessly, repelled by the technique he had honed. Wook's initial skepticism faltered. By all logic, Chal should have failed immediately. He had not undergone the basic training required to resist magic. Yet here he stood, weaving mana through his body with a precision that defied expectations. Chal met Wook's gaze, unflinching, a silent challenge. He was testing himself, measuring his capabilities against those around him. Wook recognized it, the drive, the hunger for greater challenges. This boy was not just some nameless bastard child, he was something else entirely. Mockery twisted into grudging respect. Calling him illegitimate now felt meaningless. Talent spoke louder than bloodlines. Later, as the grueling session ended, Chal stretched his limbs, exhaling in mild exhaustion. The household was utterly insane, forcing children into devices designed to bombard them with magic to build resistance. Yet, what had truly caught him off guard was Wook's apology. A shift in tone, a flicker of unexpected humility. Perhaps things were changing. As he turned to leave, a presence loomed behind him. A hand reached for him, only to be deflected with sharp precision. Hua stood there, seething. Her voice was venomous, spitting accusations. She demanded his attention, claiming superiority in both blood and age. Yet Chul had no interest in entertaining her games. He dismissed her with cold indifference, yet she refused to be ignored. Her aura flared, mana surging into her fist. He sighed inwardly, so this was how it would be. She struck, but he moved faster. In an instant, he seized her by the throat, lifting her just enough to make his point. There was no hesitation, no softness in his grip. He had no patience for her tantrums. If she wished to act like a child, she should return to their mother's embrace. He released her with disinterest, as if she were no more than a minor inconvenience. She gasped, fury igniting within her. This was all his fault. Because of his actions during the steel selection ritual, she had become the shadow to his light. Compared to him at every turn, forced to push herself beyond her limits, deprived of rest and sustenance in a desperate bid to surpass him. And yet, he remained ahead. It wasn't fair. He met her frustration with cold reality. She had the luxury of placing blame, but he did not. If she could not keep up, she should stop chasing. If exhaustion consumed her, then she should rest. If resentment burned within her, then she should strive to overtake him. That was the nature of their world. Strength dictated worth. Hua's rage erupted into a declaration. At the naming ceremony, she would defeat him. She would force him to bow before her, to acknowledge her superiority. Chul merely smirked. He welcomed the challenge. Elsewhere, in the exclusive Section 7 training hall, reserved for those of direct lineage, a maid greeted a new arrival with startled reverence. Huayan had returned. Without hesitation, she sought her daughter, demanding a private conversation. Beyond the doors, within the dimly lit chamber, Hua drove her fists into a training target, frustration echoing with every strike. Huayan's voice suddenly interrupted Hua's focus, catching her off guard. She had been deep in training, trying to improve herself, but Huayan's words cut through the air with disappointment. She had heard about Hua's recent loss and was clearly unimpressed. Huayan reminded Hua that she had always told her to break her rivals without hesitation. Instead, Hua had failed, and in Huayan's eyes, it would have been better if she had just quit altogether rather than avoiding a well-deserved reprimand. Hua, however, remained firm. She acknowledged that she understood Huayan's perspective, but this time, things were different. She wasn't training because she was being told to. She was doing it because she truly wanted to. This was her own choice, not something forced upon her. She had made up her mind to win, no matter what, and not because someone else had dictated it to her. Huayan, skeptical, questioned Hua's determination. She wanted to know what had changed, what had driven Hua to this resolve. When Hua mentioned that she would surpass her opponent, Huayan's expression hardened. To her, it was laughable that Hua was being motivated by someone she considered inferior. Hua's answer only frustrated her more. Stepping closer, Huayan lifted Hua's chin, locking eyes with her. She reminded Hua of her status. She was a legitimate child of their family, someone with prestige and power. Her opponent, on the other hand, was nothing more than a bastard child. Their standings were completely different. It should have been natural for Hua to win, yet she was allowing herself to be influenced by someone beneath her. Without waiting for an answer, Huayan pulled out a small container holding a shimmering liquid. She explained that it was called dreamlike trance, a lethal poison. If Hua could not surpass her opponent through sheer skill, then she should use this to gain the upper hand. This was the family's way. It had always been. With that final statement, Huayan left Hua standing there, the poison in her hands and a weight in her heart. Meanwhile, in another part of the academy, Gawa stared at a monitor in disbelief. The rankings had just been released, and the results were shocking. Chul's name sat at the top of the list, ranking number 1 in mana arts, weapon arts, and the written exam. It made no sense. How had he managed to excel in every category? Chul, however, remained calm. He reassured Gawa that there was no need to worry, but before they could discuss it further, Gawa threw her arms around him in an emotional embrace. She felt guilty for not doing anything to support him, yet he had still managed to achieve so much on his own. Chul tried to dismiss her worries, but their moment was interrupted by the loud sound of someone approaching at full speed. Younger burst into the room, full of energy and excitement. Without hesitation, she announced that it was time for training. Chul, still recovering from his last session, hesitated. He told her that he had just finished, but she insisted that training mana actually helped relieve fatigue. He had never heard of such an effect before, and when he voiced his skepticism, Junga simply shrugged and claimed it was probably true. Sighing in resignation, Chul agreed. He had something to show her anyway. When she realized what he meant, her eyes lit up with anticipation. She asked if he had finally attained his first star, but he only smirked in response. Understanding mana arts required mastering 3 core stages. The first was the Iron Body stage, where a person strengthened their physical body to withstand the flow of mana. The second was the Qi Gong stage, where one learned to change the very nature of their mana. The final stage was the Extraordinary Ability stage, where supernatural abilities were unlocked through mana manipulation. However, Chul's aunt's version of mana arts was different. Even within the same stages, her techniques allowed for unique abilities beyond the traditional understanding. Instead of following the standard progression, her method divided mana arts into different star levels. Jianga, after assessing Chul's progress, was convinced that he had reached the first star. She admitted that she had initially expected it to take much longer. Mastering mana paths was no simple feat, and she had assumed it would take him another year at least. Yet, Chul had managed to grasp the concept far quicker than expected. He explained that his training had been intense, so much so that he had nearly lost control. His mana circle and paths had almost shattered from the strain. In hindsight, he thought he should have just allowed mana to flow naturally, like water. After all, the human body was nothing more than a vessel for mana. Younger fell silent for a moment, staring at her hands as if deep in thought. Then, in a strange turn, she started calling Chul baby repeatedly, which felt somewhat odd. She then stated that although it would take time, she believed she could achieve the same results as him. Chul sighed, but was relieved that she had at least realized her own potential. Suddenly, she hugged him again, squeezing him tightly, so tightly that it almost felt like she was trying to crush him. Overwhelmed with excitement, she declared that they would now move on to the 2-star level. Chul, barely able to breathe under her grip, asked if she was serious. She explained that what he had achieved was indeed a major milestone, but it was different from the traditional first stage. She then asked him what he thought he was best at. Chul was about to say swordsmanship, but Gyanga interrupted him before he could even finish. She disagreed, stating that she had secretly watched him train before, even though he had never noticed. From what she had observed, his greatest strength wasn't his swordsmanship, but his talent for mana arts. She emphasized that his ability in mana arts was on a completely different level. In the past, no one had been able to master the mana arts she taught. But Chul was different. He had a natural gift for it. This made her certain that reaching 2 stars wouldn't be a challenge for him, and once he did, the upcoming naming ceremony would be effortless. From that moment forward, she decided to teach him proper techniques, urging him to focus. Chul agreed, but then noticed something beside her. He pointed at a small box to her right and asked what it was. Gyanga tapped the box casually, saying it was nothing special, but before Chul could relax, something shot out of the box and sliced his cheek. His eyes widened in shock. Gyanga, on the other hand, looked absolutely delighted. She revealed that the box contained metal marbles, small but deadly projectiles. She explained that true mastery of mana arts required movement. Staying still while using mana was no different from having dead mana arts. If Chul wanted to progress, he needed to learn how to move while releasing mana. With a wide grin, she announced that it was time to begin real training. Chul, looking less than enthusiastic, hesitated. Gyanga, however, was already gearing up for the next phase. Despite his reservations, he knew there was no turning back. The real challenge was only just beginning. A bit later, Chul found himself standing alongside his instructor and Hua, ready for whatever came next. Li Zhuangkun, another squad leader of the Blood Tiger Squad, makes his entrance. He announces that he will now begin teaching them the secret techniques. Without wasting time, he instructs them to pick their weapon of choice and return immediately, giving them only 1 minute to decide. The group quickly disperses, but Hua pauses, her gaze lingering on Chul, which irritates him. He snaps at her to say whatever is on her mind, startling her. She insists she has nothing to say, but remarks that she thought he used the sword. Chul, however, dismisses this assumption. She recalls that whenever she saw him wielding a weapon, it was always a blade. Meanwhile, Chul confidently approaches with multiple weapons in his hands. Zhuangkun eyes him skeptically, questioning his decision. Chul simply states that he was told to choose a weapon, and these are the ones he uses. Zhuangkun is momentarily taken aback before calling him an idiot for not understanding the real meaning of his words. He explains that he won't be teaching them stances or techniques. Instead, their training will focus on something deeper, awakening the sixth sense within them, something that has always been present in their blood. Only by unlocking this hidden potential can they grasp the true essence of their clan's secret arts. Before Hua can even process this information, Zhuangkun suddenly launches a rapid attack. Chul barely manages to react, instinctively blocking just in time, but the sheer force sends him flying. Zhuangkun, surprised that Chul was able to block, watches him struggle to his feet. Chul, however, can't believe he has to endure another round of brutal training. In his previous life, he never fully experienced this regimen, but now he intends to make the most of it. The training, however, proves far more challenging than he anticipated. Jiang Kun spares no mercy, repeatedly striking Chul, and when Hua steps in, she too is swiftly knocked down. Days turn into weeks, and the relentless training continues. Chul notes that a full month has passed since they started under Jiang Kun's guidance. Their bodies are constantly battered, suffering broken bones and internal injuries, far from the kind of training any normal 10-year-old should endure. Yet, Chul refuses to complain. He is finally starting to grasp the fundamentals of this grueling regimen. Hua regains consciousness, groaning as she realizes she passed out again. Chul dryly informs her that this is the 22nd time, while he has only collapsed 16 times. She argues that it was simply because she wasn't prepared. Meanwhile, Jiang Kun observes them with growing interest. He acknowledges that Hua's body is surprisingly durable, as she has withstood repeated strikes without suffering serious injuries. As for Jiang Kun, initially thought he was foolish for selecting multiple weapons. However, he now realizes that Jiang is proficient in all of them and knows how to utilize each one effectively. After a month of training, Jiang is beginning to adapt, and Jiang Kun finds this development rather intriguing. Jiang Kun announces that their training will continue and orders them back to their positions. Later, both Chul and Hua collapse, exhausted. Chul turns to Hua, suggesting that she help him land a coordinated strike. She is skeptical but eventually agrees, though not without making it clear that he owes her for this. Chul acknowledges that he has no chance of winning in a direct confrontation, so he must capitalize on teamwork. He maneuvers strategically, aiming for a blind spot, but Jiang Kun anticipates the move and dodges effortlessly. Undeterred, Chul swiftly adjusts and deflects Jiang Kun's counterattack. Jiang Kun appears impressed and immediately retaliates. As their clash intensifies, Chul yells for Hua to strike. She rushes in as planned, allowing Chul to switch tactics. He discards his spear and transitions to his sword. With determination, he channels the power of the boundless technique, an ultimate attack known as Split Demon. His weapon glows with aura as he lunges forward. Jiang Kun's eyes widen in surprise at Chul's speed. But just before the final strike, Chul unexpectedly releases his sword, pivoting into a punch instead. Jiang Kun blocks the attack, but is caught off guard by Chul's unpredictability. However, the impact is too much for Chul, and he spits up blood as he is sent crashing into a wall, seriously injured. Jiang Kun smirks, announcing that it has been 37 days, and congratulates Chul on successfully awakening his sixth sense. However, he turns to Hua and tells her that she still has a long way to go before she achieves the same feat. Without hesitation, he throws her next to Chul and declares that their training for the day is over. Hua, still winded, turns to Chul in frustration, demanding to know what happened to his so-called plan. She trusted him, and now she's paying the price. Meanwhile, Jiang Kun examines his hand, realizing that despite using mana, Chul managed to break through his defense. It was only a small amount of mana, but it still forced him to react. He acknowledges that Chul possesses a rare ability, the intuition to abandon certain attacks in favor of a better strategy. This level of judgment is not something many possess, and it is clear that in the future, others in their household will come to fear Chul's growth. It takes Hua 47 days to finally awaken her sixth sense. With that milestone reached, they both graduate from Jiang Kun's training. Chul spends the remaining days reviewing what he has learned and allowing his body to recover from the relentless ordeal. Just as he begins to settle into a brief moment of rest, he receives an unexpected visit from his oldest brother, Myeongjon. Taishan's eldest son was a man of remarkable skill, known by the title Twin Star. His abilities in both magic and martial arts were so advanced that he was on the verge of reaching the prestigious second rank in both disciplines. This level of talent set him apart, earning him the admiration of many and the cautious respect of others. However, to Chul, he was not just an awe-inspiring figure, but someone who felt like an older brother in every sense. When Myeongjong finally had a moment to visit, he acknowledged that his obligations had kept him away for too long. Despite being part of the same family, he and Chul had rarely spent time together. Yet, Chul held no resentment toward him. He had always recognized his older brother's face, even if their interactions had been brief. Though they shared only half of their bloodline, Myeongjong never saw that as a reason to distance himself. To him, Chul was as much a brother as any other sibling. Myeongjong quickly noticed Chul's formal demeanor, which felt unnecessary. He did not see the need for rigid politeness between them. To mark their first meaningful meeting, he presented Chul with a gift, a rare elixir known as nectar, the wine of the gods. This precious potion had been given to him when he was accepted into France's prestigious Eiffel Magic University. Chul immediately understood the significance of the gift. Nectar was one of the rarest potions in existence, with only a limited quantity being produced each year in France's Magic Tower. Its properties were extraordinary, capable of restoring and enhancing one's magical abilities beyond normal limits. Receiving such an item was a clear sign of Myeongjong's deep regard for him. Myeongjong also observed that Chul was different from their other siblings. While most of them viewed each other as rivals, Chul did not exhibit the same hostility. However, Chul did not deny the presence of rivalry. As a member of the family, he understood that competition was unavoidable, but rather than engage in petty conflicts, he sought a worthy challenge. He wanted to grow stronger, to one day surpass Myeongjong himself. Myeongjong found the thought amusing, welcoming the challenge. If that day ever came, he would face it gladly. Despite everything, Chul carried memories from his past life. He knew that Myeongjong had truly cared for him before. This time, he would not allow history to repeat itself. He would protect what mattered. A few days later, the long-anticipated second trial of the Lee clan arrived. The naming ceremony. This sacred tradition had been passed down for generations, serving as a test of worth for all clan members. The trial was held on Red and Blue Island, a land where the very ground shifted in color based on the mana density in the air. Deeply intertwined with the clan's history, the island was where every member had to prove their strength by surviving its challenges. Chul and Hwa stood among the gathered participants as an elder explained the rules. They would need to endure the island's hardships for 3 weeks. To ensure their safety, each participant received a tracking device that allowed their location to be monitored. However, the trial chamber, the final stage of the test, would only open for 2 days at the end of the survival period. With the rules clarified, the participants were transported to the island, left to navigate its dangers on their own. Not long after landing, Ho appeared deep in thought, hesitant to speak. Chu, already anticipating this moment, waited for her to gather her resolve. For days, she had been acting strangely, clearly burdened by something she had yet to say. After a moment of hesitation, she took out her tracking device, examining it carefully before finally revealing her concerns. She urged Chul to remove his device temporarily. Though confused, he complied. Once she was certain that no one was listening, she handed him a small vial containing a substance called dreamlike trance. This was a highly dangerous poison, effective only against individuals under the age of 15. When exposed to air, it would completely evaporate within 5 minutes. If consumed, it would severely disrupt the mana pathways, making it nearly impossible to use magic properly for an extended period. Chul immediately questioned where she had obtained such a substance, but Hwa refused to answer. Before he could press further, she suddenly smashed the vial against the ground, ensuring that no trace of the poison remained. Her actions made her stance clear. She had no intention of using deceitful methods to win the trial. If she was going to prove herself, it would be through her own strength alone. She then reminded Chul to take the test seriously and to give it everything he had. Even without her words, he had already made up his mind to do just that. However, she offered him one last warning. Once he had familiarized himself with the island, he should consider heading toward its center. Rumors suggested that it was the most dangerous area of all. Chul took her words into account, but found amusement in her concern. While she planned to remain on the island's outskirts to build up her strength gradually, He had no intention of following the same strategy. His goal was already set. He would move straight toward the island's center, into the heart of the greatest danger that awaited. In the observation room, a group of individuals closely monitored the progress of the participants on large, glowing screens. The atmosphere was tense, yet filled with anticipation as they analyzed the data in real time. Their attention was primarily on one individual, Chel Jung, the 8th ranked among them. Her performance had exceeded expectation. Despite it being her first practical test, she had already completed the first assignment flawlessly, and the number of creatures she had defeated was remarkable. It was clear that her abilities reflected the teachings of Zhongqin, her mentor. One of the observers noted the time it had taken, only 47 days. This was much faster than the 2 months originally estimated for her. Zhou Hongquan, another analyst, pointed out that while Chel possessed talent, it had never been extraordinary before. However, her sudden improvement had been triggered by a single factor: competition. Someone had pushed her to grow stronger at an alarming rate, and that person was none other than Chul Jung. Curious about his whereabouts, Chul's name was brought up, and it was revealed that he was not engaging in direct combat like Chul. Instead, he was setting up a base of operations. This decision was met with immediate criticism. Xiao Zhang scoffed at the idea, calling Chul a coward. He mocked him for hiding instead of fighting, arguing that such behavior disgraced their clan's reputation. To him, a bastard child like Chul had no right to bear their name. Miangjiang, however, disagreed. He pointed out that securing a safe hideout in such a perilous environment was not cowardice, but a tactical decision. Survival itself was a crucial part of the trial, and preparation was just as important as brute strength. While some in the room agreed with this reasoning, others were still fixated on their high expectations, fueled by Chel's outstanding performance. Xiao Zhang remained dismissive, claiming that being merely normal within their clan was unacceptable. The room murmured in agreement, finding amusement in the idea of one of their own being average. Myeongjung watched in silence, unable to believe that Chul was being ridiculed solely because of his birth. He began to wonder if their clan had always been this way, or if it had only recently fallen so low. Regardless, his mind kept returning to a single question: why had Chul decided to venture toward the center of the island? His gaze shifted to Tai Hong, who was visibly uneasy. It was clear that he, too, was troubled by Chul's actions. Sighing, Myeongjung realized that he wasn't the only one concerned about what was unfolding. Meanwhile, Chul had found what seemed like an ideal location for his base. It was a small cave tucked away in the landscape. Without hesitation, he took out a bundle of medicinal herbs, set them alight, and tossed them inside. The smoke from the burning herbs filled the cave, driving away any lingering creatures or potential threats. Once satisfied, he blocked the entrance to secure his hiding spot. The observers still watching through their screens were impressed by his ability to conceal his presence so effectively. Just as they were beginning to acknowledge his survival skills, Chul did something unexpected. He removed his tracking device and placed it on a leaf, allowing it to drift away with the wind. Then, he covered the camera's lens with another leaf, completely cutting off their visual feed. The entire monitoring room was thrown into confusion. They had no idea what he was doing now. Zhou Hongquan let out a laugh. Chul was as unpredictable as ever. Now hidden from their prying eyes, Chul allowed himself a moment of relief. With the trackers disabled, he could finally use the boundless technique without revealing it to anyone. Since he was already on this island, he planned to make the most of his time here. It was time to put his training to the test. Sometime later, Chul sat in front of a makeshift pot, staring at its contents with clear disgust. The mixture inside was thick, murky, and emitted a pungent odor. He had followed the recipe exactly, but the result was hardly appetizing. Even so, he knew he had no choice but to consume it. The tea, made from rare mana herbs, was said to enhance one's magical energy. Despite its unbearable taste, drinking it was the most efficient way to increase his mana reserves. As he took a sip, he nearly gagged. It was worse than he had expected. However, he forced himself to drink every last drop, enduring the nauseating flavor. He reminded himself that in his past life, he never had the luxury of obtaining even a cheap elixir. This was an opportunity he could not waste. Keonga had advised him before the trial began. She had emphasized the immense amount of mana surrounding the island and encouraged him to absorb as much of it as possible. This tea, despite its revolting taste, would make that process far more effective. After finishing the concoction, he exhaled sharply. It was a horrible experience, but one that would ultimately strengthen him. This was only the beginning. His solitary journey on the island had just begun, and he had 3 long weeks ahead of him. By the 18th day of the naming ceremony, back at Myung-jung's office, the tension had only grown. The silence was broken by a knock at the door. Someone had arrived, seeking an audience. Myung-jung, still lost in thought about Chul's unpredictable actions, barely registered the knock before responding, allowing the visitor to enter. What news would they bring? A sudden interruption draws everyone's attention. The messenger apologizes for disturbing them, but Myung-jung immediately senses that something serious has happened. Standing beside him is Yu Jang-hyun, the vice leader of the Azura Sword Squad and one of his most trusted affiliates. Without hesitation, Jang-hyun delivers the troubling news. A large group of vagabonds has entered South Korea's northern regions. This is unusual, as he had initially expected them to move through the unexplored territories, avoiding direct confrontation. However, instead of taking a hidden route, they are heading straight south. The situation becomes more concerning when Myung-jung realizes that in just 2 days' travel from their current location, the vagabonds will reach the land owned by the Stone Mind clan. Vagabonds are known for committing all kinds of crimes while passing through unguarded regions, yet these particular individuals seem to have a purpose. Myung-jung is convinced they wouldn't dare step into his clan's domain without a hidden agenda. It is possible that their ragged appearance is just a disguise, concealing their true identity and the forces backing them. He recalls recent intelligence reports that indicated movement from the 9 Dragon Stronghold. This powerful organization, led by Sung Yoon, has always been a constant threat. Their forces have been expanding toward the northern borders, frequently violating territorial boundaries and provoking conflict. Now, with Myung-jung's father away, it seems like their enemies have chosen the perfect moment to strike. He asks Jang-hyun whether the intelligence branch is aware of this situation. Jang-hyun explains that, thanks to Myung-jung's previous orders to keep an eye on any unusual movements, he was able to uncover this information even before the intelligence unit could react. Given the gravity of the situation, Myung-jung instructs him to coordinate with the intelligence branch and dig deeper. He has a strong feeling that this is only the beginning of something much larger. He hopes he is wrong, but a lingering sense of unease remains. That night, back at the location where the naming ceremony is taking place, an ominous event unfolds. A strange magic circle appears on the ground, pulsing with eerie energy. A crack forms in the very fabric of space, distorting reality. From within the crack, a figure emerges, wearing a sinister smirk. The mysterious individual mutters that 2 nights should be more than enough to eliminate a single bastard child. The next day, far from the ceremony, on a remote island, an entirely different battle is taking place. The ground trembles under the weight of an enormous creature. This is Draco, the 7th-ranked monster dragon, standing tall and menacing. Chul, the warrior facing it, braces himself as the beast unleashes a fiery attack. A blazing torrent of flames erupts, rushing toward him with incredible speed. Chul reacts just in time, dodging beneath the scorching heat as it barely grazes past his ear. Seizing the opportunity, he surges forward, channeling his mana into his sword. With a powerful leap, he raises his weapon high above his head and brings it down in a devastating strike. The blade pierces through the dragon's skull with precision. The mighty creature collapses, lifeless, marking Chul's victory. As he catches his breath, he acknowledges the sheer strength of dragons. Had he faced one upon his arrival, he would have been easily defeated. 19 days have passed since he set foot on the Red and Blue Island. He has finally reached the dragon's territory, but lingering any longer would be a waste. He had come here for a reason, and now that reason calls to him once again. A sudden sensation stops him in his tracks. He crouches behind some bushes, his instincts screaming at him. His suspicions are confirmed when he spots a group of creatures in the distance. 8th-ranked monsters known as lizard men. Something is not right. These creatures should only be found on the outskirts of the island, yet they are here deep within its heart. Even stranger, they seem to be attacking something and then quickly retreating. Chul narrows his eyes, gripping his sword tightly. Something is definitely happening, and whatever it is, it's far from normal. Chul remained crouched in the undergrowth, watching the lizard men. As low-ranking monsters, they lacked intelligence, moving in predictable patterns and acting on instinct rather than strategy. Yet something was off. Their behavior was erratic, almost as if they were following orders. If they were being influenced by an external force, then this situation was far more dangerous than he had initially thought. Sensing movement, he swung his sword in a quick arc. The closest lizard man shrieked in surprise and scrambled backward, trying to escape. Chul wasn't shocked. He had suspected something unnatural was at play. Without hesitation, he moved again, his blade cutting cleanly through 2 of the creatures in an instant. Their bodies fell to the ground before they could even react. One strange occurrence could be dismissed as a coincidence, but twice? This was no accident. He needed to follow them and uncover the truth. As he pursued the remaining creatures, he heard something in the distance. A voice rang out, issuing a command. It was unclear whether it belonged to the lizardmen or someone else, but the words were unmistakable. An order to confront the Lee clan and engage them in battle. Further ahead, a figure walked forward, surrounded by an eerie purple aura. He observed the situation with mild amusement, his gaze settling on Chul. He found it curious that someone so young had managed to defeat so many monsters on his own. Still, it didn't matter. At the end of the day, the boy was just a child. One of the lizard men bowed before the man, showing submission. The man smirked, fully convinced that the boy would walk straight into his trap. There was no need for a backup plan. His name was Nishiyama Shugo, a trainer skilled in manipulating monsters. He was confident that Chul would be an easy target. But Chul, hidden high in the trees, had already pieced it together. The trap was obvious. So obvious that he had doubted himself at first, but now there was no mistaking it. The presence of a trainer controlling the monsters raised more questions than answers. How had an outsider infiltrated this place? The only explanation was a teleportation spell, which meant someone from the Lee clan had assisted in setting it up. He let out a quiet chuckle. The smartest course of action would be to alert the main household and wait for reinforcements. But by the time they arrived, the enemy would already be gone. That left him with only one choice. Sliding a small device into his pocket to record their conversation, Chul activated his stealth arts. His body became semi-translucent, his presence fading into the shadows. Moving swiftly, he leapt from the tree, closing the distance in an instant. He positioned himself behind Shuga, sword raised, ready to strike. But just as he was about to land the blow, a sharp screech echoed through the air. A bird resting near Shugo had sensed the attack and sounded the alarm. Shugo turned, eyes widening in surprise. Chul cursed under his breath. So it wasn't just a bird, but a danger detection artifact. His element of surprise was lost. Shugo reacted quickly, raising his weapon to block the strike and creating distance between them. He was shocked by the boy's skill. An illegitimate child shouldn't have been this strong. Still, he wasn't about to back down. With a flick of his wrist, he sent the remaining lizardmen to attack. Chul, unfazed, executed the 3rd form of the 7-star sword, True Azure. His strikes were swift and precise, cutting down all 3 monsters in an instant. But before he could advance, an invisible force tightened around his body. It felt as though chains had wrapped around him, holding him in place. Shugo's laughter filled the air. The array had worked perfectly. It was one of the most advanced formations he could use, designed to suppress the mana flow of martial artists. Without mana, Chul was nothing more than a powerless child. His defeat was inevitable. But Chul wasn't concerned. If the array only blocked mana from his heart, then it was nothing more than an inconvenience. He redirected his energy through his mana paths instead, breaking free from the invisible shackles. Without hesitation, he dashed forward, heading straight for Shugo. At the last second, instead of striking him, Chul executed a perfectly timed somersault over his head, landing gracefully behind him. Shugo, momentarily caught off guard, was surprised by the maneuver. Chul smirked. He could have stabbed him in the back, but where was the fun in that? Shugo started to panic, demanding to know how Chul had broken free, but Chul wasn't going to give him any answers. He had already sent word to the household about Shugo's presence. Surrender was his only option. Shugo, however, refused to back down. He still had one last trick up his sleeve. He muttered something under his breath, and suddenly a massive shadow loomed over Chul. Before he could react, a powerful force struck him, shattering his sword and sending him flying backward. He crashed hard against a tree, coughing up blood from the impact. He barely managed to lift his head as his vision blurred. A colossal figure stepped forward, his mind raced, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. The ground trembled beneath the creature's weight. Then realization struck. This was Turtlehead Mountain, the guardian of the Red and Blue Islands, a third-ranked monster, a living nightmare. How could Shugo have tamed something this powerful? Shugo smirked, pleased with himself. He admitted that his control over the creature wasn't perfect. But it didn't matter. It only needed to follow one order: to kill Chul. There was no escape. He should accept his fate while he still had the chance. Shugo scattered talismans onto the ground, preparing to seal Chul's movements once again, but Chul forced himself to stay calm. If Shugo's control over the monster wasn't perfect, then there was still a chance. The key wasn't to fight the beast. The key was to take down the trainer himself. There was only one option left, one that he had prepared for, but never thought he would actually have to use. And now it was his only chance. This particular medicine had been outlawed due to its extreme side effects, earning it the name Mana Booster. However, Chul had no choice. He began circulating all his mana, drawing upon every ounce of strength he had left. There was one final technique, one so dangerous that Gyanga had warned him to use it only in the most dire circumstances. But this was one of those moments. He had no other option but to unleash the heaven-defying technique. If only he had eliminated Shugo sooner, things might not have reached this point. Without hesitation, Chul launched himself off the ground, propelling toward Turtlehead Mountain with incredible speed. His sword slashed through the air, sending out a powerful wave of energy. Yet, when it struck the monster's tough exterior, it barely left a mark. He had expected resistance, but this thing was an absolute fortress. He needed to act quickly and follow up with another move. Before he could strike again, the massive creature let out an earth-shaking roar. The force of its cry sent waves of mana rippling through the air. Chul's body locked up. He knew this ability. It was called the Mountain's Cry. The sheer intensity of its mana-based sound paralyzed its target with overwhelming fear. His limbs refused to move, his breath caught in his throat, and his instincts screamed at him to retreat. Then, something within him stirred. A dark aura began to swirl around his heart, the same energy that had appeared when he regressed. It coated his body in a thin layer, shielding him from the crippling effects of the Mountain's Cry. He forced his body forward, recognizing this fleeting moment as his only chance. With his sword held low behind him, Chul channeled everything into his next move. He activated the first form of Boundless, the Split Demon technique. His blade cleaved through the air in a precise strike, aimed at the beast's throat. However, even with all his strength, it wasn't enough. Turtlehead Mountain barely flinched before unleashing a devastating counterattack. A massive purple beam erupted from the creature's mouth, tearing through the sky. The sheer force of it was enough to split the clouds apart. Chul was hit head-on, the impact sending him tumbling through the air. Blood spewed from his mouth as pain racked his entire body. He couldn't afford to waste time, but the combined strain of the mana booster and the heaven-defying technique left him unable to move. He had only 10 seconds before his body completely gave out. 9 seconds. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to push through the pain. He had to find the trainer. 5 seconds. He scanned the battlefield desperately. Then he sensed something. A presence on the ground. 4 seconds. There, he locked onto his target. 3 seconds. Chugo's back was turned. If Chul could just reach him in time. 2 seconds. Chugo turned, realizing the threat too late. 1 second. Chul lunged, sword aimed straight for his throat. He wasn't close enough. If only he had a little more reach. Then he remembered. He could extend his blade using Boundless. In an instant, his sword lengthened, slicing across Shugo's chest. The trainer staggered, gasping in shock. Chul, exhausted and barely holding on, dropped his sword to the ground. His vision blurred, his body on the verge of collapse. He had won, but he wasn't safe yet. He needed to stabilize himself before unconsciousness claimed him. Junga had told him that if he ever used this technique, he must drink the nectar Myeongjong had given him. Luckily, he still had it with him. But as he reached for it, his vision went black. When he opened his eyes again, everything was white. Confused, he tried to focus, but nothing around him made sense. The battlefield, the trainer, the monster, where were they? Panic settled in as an unbearable pain shot through his body, as if he were being torn apart from the inside out. Then he saw it. A massive, otherworldly eye staring directly at him. A deep, ancient voice echoed in the void, commenting on his condition. It mentioned that what resided within him was far too dangerous for a human to contain. Individually, each of those elements would be a severe threat, but together, they were beyond comprehension. The entity had hoped he wouldn't wake up, but now that he had, there was only one thing left to do. Chul's gaze shifted toward a strange object. A glowing purple hive, pulsing with energy. The voice identified it as the purple glowstone of clarity, but instead of being something for him to consume, the being declared that it would consume him. A new era was approaching, and Chul had to grow stronger, or else he would be devoured by time itself. As the vision faded, the last thing he saw was Turtle Head Mountain retreating into the distance. When he awoke, he found himself lying down, his body aching. A familiar voice called out to him. It was Hua. Still disoriented, he called her name informally, and she immediately reminded him that she was older than him. She let it slide this time since he wasn't in good shape, but her tone carried amusement. She asked how he was feeling. Chul took a moment to assess his condition. His body was a wreck, but something felt different. His mana reserves had increased significantly. Had he really consumed the purple glowstone of clarity? He couldn't remember. He listed his injuries: damaged mana pathways, twisted intestines, fractured bones, muscle breakdown. It was bad, but it could have been worse. Hua listened before bluntly stating that he sounded awful. Chul sighed. The purple glowstone of clarity was originally meant for her. It was an extremely rare miracle item, capable of strengthening the body, boosting mana, and providing resistance against poisons and curses. He had planned to obtain it for himself eventually, but taking it like this left him feeling guilty. Before he could dwell on it, another voice called out to him. Myeongjong! Chul slowly sat up, still feeling the lingering pain from his injuries. Across from him, Myeongjong approached with a few potions in hand, his expression filled with concern. He placed them down and observed Chul carefully, asking if he was feeling any better and suggesting that he prioritize restoring his mana. Without hesitation, Chul took one of the potions and drank it, dismissing the need for anything more. Myeongjong remained silent for a moment, watching him with an unreadable expression. After a brief pause, Myeongjong excused himself from the conversation momentarily. His voice carried an edge of cold determination as he expressed what he would have done had Chul not survived. No matter how powerful or influential the organizations involved were, he would have made sure that both the trainer and everyone connected to him paid the price. Though his words were serious, Chul found amusement in them, taking comfort in knowing someone had such strong loyalty toward him. Despite the heavy topic, Myeongjong admitted that, while Chul's actions were commendable from a martial artist's perspective, as an older brother he couldn't view it in a positive light. Chul, reflecting on the battle, acknowledged that he hadn't expected the Turtle Head Mountain to appear. If he had known, he would have waited rather than rushing in unprepared. Hua, who had been listening, sighed, relieved that at least he could recognize the difference between confidence and recklessness. Moving on, Chul mentions that since he was the one who took care of the trainer, he should have access to any information the trainer possessed. Myeongjong, unsurprised by this request, explained that the trainer had been an almost 5th-rank sorcerer who once practiced on Myodo. However, he had been expelled after attempting to obtain forbidden sorcery. It seemed likely that before being caught, the trainer had activated one of those forbidden spells while the Turtle Head Mountain was still dormant, attempting to make it appear as if a monster had caused the destruction. Chul, processing this information, asked if they had identified the people behind this incident. Myeongjong admitted that it would be difficult to figure out right away. However, something clicked in Chul's mind. He suddenly realized that he wasn't the final target. Myeongjong was. When questioned about this conclusion, Chul explained that the real goal had been to damage Myeongjong's reputation. By making it seem as though he had failed to detect intruders and reacted too slowly to the crisis, his position would be undermined, leading others to question his competence. Myeongjong sighed, acknowledging that this was a likely possibility. He seemed to be thinking about what steps he should take next. Noticing his troubled expression, Chul asked if he was truly okay. Myeongjong reassured him, patting his head in a rare display of affection. Though this incident might hurt his reputation slightly, it wouldn't be enough to shake his standing. Still, he couldn't afford to leave his post for too long, meaning he needed to return to his duties soon. Before he could leave, Chul reached out and grabbed his hand, stopping him. An idea had just come to him, and he wanted to propose something. Instead of letting the situation harm Myeonggjong's image, they could turn it to his advantage. If they spread the story that Myeongjong had anticipated the trainer's attack and had given Chul instructions in advance, it would frame him as someone who had prepared for a crisis that even the intelligence division had overlooked. Though Myeongjong considered simply telling the truth, Chul pointed out that doing so would only make people more suspicious of him. If they played it right, not only would Myeongjong maintain his standing, but others would hesitate before seeing him as an easy target in the future. Understanding the benefits of this plan, Myeongjong agreed and asked what Chul wanted in return. Chul's request was simple: 3 days of unrestricted access to the library. That was all he needed. Myeongjong playfully called Chul arrogant, but it was clear he was joking. He laughed, appreciating the plan and thanking him for his help. However, Chul dismissed the gratitude, pointing out that both of them stood to benefit from this arrangement. Myeongjong then reflected that, even without Chul's involvement, he would have found a way to handle the situation. Just as he said this, his phone rang. He glanced at it, recognizing the call as being from the Azure Sword squad. It was his cue to leave. Before departing, he casually tossed something toward Chul. When Chul caught it and looked down, he realized it was boundless. Myeongjong reassured him that he would keep its existence a secret. Holding the weapon in his hands, Chul smirked, thinking that his brother was clever as always. A short while later, Hua returned. Noticing that the conversation must have gone well, Chul confirmed it, and she immediately asked which test he planned to take, mentioning that all options should now be available to him. Before answering, Chul wanted to know more about her choice. She reminded him that she had been the one to bring up the tests in the first place. He insisted that he would only share his decision if she shared hers first. Without hesitation, she declared that she had chosen the most difficult test. Curious, she asked about his choice. Chul responded that he would take on the Hall of Fighting. Hua was caught off guard by his answer. She didn't recognize the name of the test and assumed he was referring to the one located on the outskirts. When Chul confirmed her suspicion, she looked visibly disappointed. She had expected better from him. In her eyes, taking that test wasn't worth discussing. She had assumed he was more ambitious than her, but apparently that wasn't the case. Chul understood her reaction. He knew there was a widespread belief that the difficulty of the test depended on the hall's location. She likely thought he was taking an easy route. However, he didn't care about such assumptions. Later, after walking for a long time, Chul tried to recall the exact location of the Hall of Fighting. He had a vague memory of a hidden cave somewhere nearby that was used for the second phase of the naming ceremony. He eventually found what appeared to be an ordinary rock wall and lit a torch. From the outside, it looked like any other wall, but he knew better. Drawing his blade, he slashed at the rock, and in an instant, a concealed door was revealed. A satisfied grin formed on his face. This was it. He had finally found the entrance. Without hesitation, he made a small cut on his hand. He wasn't reckless enough to inflict serious harm, just enough to channel his mana. He pressed his blood against the door, triggering its mechanism. The door slowly creaked open, revealing a dimly lit altar deep within the chamber. In the center of the altar stood a single sword. Chul stepped inside, making his way toward the altar with a steady pace. Once he reached it, he declared his intention. As a descendant of the Li clan, he formally accepted the challenge of his ancestor and requested to undergo the trial. The Hall of Fighting had only one test, a battle against oneself. There were no limits on how many attempts he could make, but no matter what, he wouldn't be allowed to leave until he succeeded. As he stood before a perfect copy of himself, Chul unsheathed his blade. The moment he took a step forward, his world turned upside down. His vision blurred, and before he could react, his head was severed from his body. Blood splattered through the air as his consciousness faded. Then, in an instant, he jolted awake. Gasping, he clutched his neck, his heart pounding. His head was still intact. It had only been an illusion. Despite knowing he couldn't die in this trial, the experience had felt disturbingly real. For most people, going through such an ordeal would be enough to drive them insane. However, that wasn't his main concern. The real issue was what this meant. The Hall of Fighting was designed to reflect his full potential, meaning his illusionary opponent could wield techniques he hadn't even mastered yet. That realization struck him hard. He should have been able to block that strike. Determined, he prepared for another attempt, but the second fight ended just as badly, with him getting stabbed in the stomach. The third attempt followed, and the result was no better. By the fifth try, he managed to deflect an attack, only to be overpowered and strangled. His 10th attempt, another beheading. He lost count after a while, but he was well past his 23rd battle, still struggling against his own reflection. By what could have been his 75th or even 80th attempt, Chul began to understand. Through constant failure, he had come to truly know himself. His greatest strengths weren't raw power or overwhelming technique, but his adaptability, his ability to navigate the unexpected, and the freedom to break conventional limits. This realization led him to act. He altered Boundless, shifting its form from a sword into a spear. This was his key to victory. His clone mirrored his movements perfectly, meaning it would respond the same way. Charging forward, Chul swung his spear overhead, testing his theory. As expected, his opponent reacted, blocking the attack. The battle continued, with both of them shifting between weapons, matching each other's movements seamlessly. With each clash, they became more alike. Every exchange pushed them toward perfect synchronization. It was a battle not just of skill, but of identity, a struggle to prove who truly understood themselves best. Chul knew that to win, he had to do more than just match his opponent. He had to surpass himself. Chul's clone moved swiftly, instantly widening the gap between them. Without hesitation, it shifted back into a sword form, its blade gleaming as it charged forward. The clone's movements were sharp and precise, closing the distance with calculated aggression. In a flash, it drove its sword straight into Chul's stomach. However, instead of showing pain, Chul smirked. He had let this happen on purpose. Seizing the opportunity, he grabbed onto the clone's arm, preventing it from retreating. With one decisive motion, he swung down using Split Demon, his blade slicing cleanly through his opponent's body, splitting it down the middle. As the clone began to fade, its features softened into a knowing smile. A strange black aura emerged from its vanishing form, dispersing into the air. Chul took a deep breath, watching as the energy dissipated. He knew that passing the Hall of Fighting wasn't just a test of strength. It unlocked a hidden ability within the Li clan's bloodline. In his past life, he had awakened the reinforced ability, the most common among his lineage, but this time, the challenge had been far harder than anything he had faced before. He couldn't help but wonder what new power he would receive. Slowly, he opened his eyes. A golden aura surrounded him, radiating with an intense brilliance. His mind started to grasp the nature of his newly acquired ability, but its full explanation remained a mystery for now. Outside the hall's entrance, a crowd had gathered, anxiously waiting. Among them, Tai Hong sighed, glancing at the door. He had assumed Chul would be finished by now, but at least there wouldn't be any more disruptions to the naming ceremony. Just as he muttered to himself, someone nearby noticed a shift in mana density. Tai Hong's eyes widened in surprise as the door finally began to open. As Chul stepped out, his legs wobbled unsteadily and exhaustion overtook him. His vision blurred and his body gave in, sending him collapsing forward. Tai Hong moved instinctively, catching him before he hit the ground. Panic flashed across his face as he shook Chul lightly, urging him to wake up. For a brief moment, Chul barely managed to open his eyes and muttered one word, "Please." Confused, Tai Hong leaned in, asking what he needed. Chul groaned, weakly requesting water and food. A mix of disbelief and frustration flickered across Tai Hong's face. He had expected something profound, perhaps a declaration of victory, but instead, Chul was just hungry. As the realization sank in, Tai Hong's initial concern turned to exasperation. He couldn't believe Chul had caused such a dramatic scene over something so simple. Still, beneath his annoyance, he genuinely cared. Time passed, and back at Chul's residence, a loud voice echoed through the halls. Gawa's shout carried a mixture of relief and anger as she called out his name. She stormed into the room, her expression stern as she berated him for worrying her. The fact that he had taken on the ancient Hall of Fighting, a challenge crafted by their forefather, had terrified her. Chul, still covered in dirt, scratched his head and admitted that he probably smelled terrible after being out of commission for an entire month. He had barely recovered from the ordeal. Gawa sighed, shaking her head. Though she had planned to scold him harshly upon his return, the relief of seeing him safe overpowered her frustration. In a softer tone, she admitted that she was just happy he was back. Chul appreciated her concern and thanked her sincerely. With a small smile, Gawa told him she would run a bath for him and prepare a meal as soon as he finished cleaning up. As she turned to leave, Chul asked about Gyeonga's whereabouts. Gawa's demeanor changed slightly, as if she had been waiting for this question but wasn't sure how to bring it up. Noticing her hesitation, Chul pressed further, sensing that something was off. The scene shifted to another location, where Girl sat in a confined space, her hands resting on her lap. A soft chuckle escaped her lips as she smiled upon hearing of Chul's return. However, despite her cheerful expression, it was clear that she was imprisoned. Chul's gaze hardened as he took in the sight before him. He demanded to know what had happened to her, but instead of answering directly, she simply expressed her relief that he was safe. Then, her curiosity took over. She commented on the noticeable change in his mana, marveling at how much stronger he had become. Given his body's previous limitations, it should have been impossible for him to handle such an increase in power. She gestured for him to sit down so they could discuss it properly, but Chul wasn't in the mood for casual conversation. His voice turned serious as he called out to her. Instead of responding with concern, Gyeonga let out a small laugh, assuring him that everything was fine. Still, Chul needed to understand what had led to this situation. As she finally explained, the pieces of the story fell into place. Gyeonga had caused an uproar in front of the elder and Chul's eldest brother. Overwhelmed by frustration, she had lashed out at them, blaming them for the constant hardships Chul faced. The thought of never seeing him again had driven her into a rage, and she couldn't hold back her emotions. The result was her imprisonment. Chul took a deep breath, admitting that he still didn't fully trust her. Yet, despite his lingering doubts, he had begun to see her as part of his family. Letting out a sigh, he knew what he had to do. He assured her that he would find a way to free her soon. Gyeongga, though touched by his determination, warned him not to push himself too hard. He reassured her that he wouldn't, promising that he would return to her shortly. Time passed once again. The scene shifted to an airport runway, where a private plane prepared to land. Outside, Chul stood alongside the rest of his family, awaiting an important arrival. As the aircraft touched down and the doors opened, their father stepped out. A warm yet commanding presence surrounded him as he looked at his gathered children. With a nod, he acknowledged them. "You must have waited a long time." The reunion was just beginning. Hu Yen assures him that she has already prepared a warm bath and a meal for him to enjoy. With that taken care of, he simply acknowledges it and moves on. Meanwhile, Cole and Hua are also present. Cole reflects on how he believed he had become much stronger after the naming ceremony. Yet standing here now, he still cannot grasp just how vast the difference between himself and his father truly is. Their eyes meet for a brief moment before his father looks away. Taishin states that he has no use for someone unwilling to fight for the family. However, it appears that only one of his children truly has the desire to surpass him. Chul is taken aback by the comment, while the other children are left wondering who he is referring to. Despite believing he had concealed his emotions well, Chul realizes that his father managed to read him effortlessly. He sighs, recognizing that nothing escapes his father's sharp gaze. Sometime later, the scene shifts to the banquet hall, where Chul stands awkwardly in a corner. He notices how extravagant the celebration is for the naming ceremony, which is uncommon for the Lee clan. Among the guests, he spots several notable figures, including the youngest leader of a magic tower and an Onmyoji chief, the same type of practitioner as his trainer. As he continues observing, someone approaches him. It is Butler Choi, who informs him that the patriarch is requesting his presence. Chul asks where he is, and Butler Choi offers to lead the way. As they walk, Chul wonders why he has been summoned personally and hopes it is nothing too serious. Outside, his father waits for him, and, upon arrival, Chul respectfully bows. However, he quickly notices that Myung-jung is also present. As they both look at him, it becomes clear to Chul what this meeting is about. Taishin wastes no time and addresses the matter at hand, the naming ceremony. Myung-jung reveals that he had been given an order to capture an outsider, and he strongly suspects Chul's involvement in the situation. Chul is stunned that his father has already discovered the truth. Despite his initial surprise, he admits to his involvement. He explains that in exchange for preventing any major issues, he struck a deal with his older brother, the right to enter the library. Taishin acknowledges this, but makes it clear that, given Chul's role in the incident, he will overlook the false reports this time. However, he warns that there will not be another chance. Chul accepts the decision, but the matter does not end there. Turning to Myung-jung, Taishin instructs him to prepare for an appropriate punishment in the near future. Since the banquet is his responsibility, he should return and ensure everything runs smoothly. Myung-jung accepts the order and leaves, briefly smiling as he passes Chul. However, Chul can only hope that his older brother will be all right. Taishin then shifts his focus back to Chul, stating that despite the false report, the successful resolution of the situation was entirely due to his efforts. He reassures Chul that he will receive the reward he had discussed with Myung-jung. Additionally, for discovering the Hall of Fighting, he intends to give him something extra. Though surprised, Chul does not protest. However, the nature of the reward remains undisclosed for now. Back at the banquet hall, Taishin stands before the gathered guests and begins his speech, expressing gratitude to everyone who traveled to attend the event. The banquet serves as a celebration to bestow blessings upon two children, and with that, the naming ceremony proceeds. He first calls Hua forward, stating that since she has been chosen by the Holy Sword, he is confident that she will always stand for justice and light. To support her on this path, she is finally granted the name Shohyun. Overjoyed, she expresses her gratitude. Next, it is Chul's turn. As he steps forward, he notices that the atmosphere is vastly different from the steel selection ritual. However, in the grand scheme of things, that does not matter. Taishin praises Chul for his strength, intelligence, and adaptability. Though flexible, he remains unwavering in his beliefs. Just as a master blacksmith refines steel into a fine blade, Chul has forged himself into someone capable of reaching his full potential. Therefore, there is only one name that truly suits him. With a snap of his fingers, Taishin announces that Chul will reclaim his original name, Chul. He explains that in the past, the name was given to symbolize strength as solid as steel. However, its meaning has since evolved. Now, it represents his journey to rise to the top of the clan. Chul feels a deep sense of fulfillment as he finally regains his true name. Grateful, he silently acknowledges his father's decision. Meanwhile, in the Judicial Department's isolation ward, another story begins to unfold. Gyeong-a remained trapped in the confined space, her patience completely gone as she continuously voiced her frustration. The tightness of the room, combined with the silence that had settled in after Chul's naming ceremony, only made her more restless. She hadn't seen him since then, and the lack of information drove her nearly mad. Her constant screeching filled the air, leaving the guards exhausted and pleading for mercy. Just as the guards were at their wits' end, a sudden phone call interrupted the noise. One of them answered, nodding along as he listened carefully. When he hung up, he turned toward Gyeong-a, who was still shouting about wanting to leave. Before she could yell another complaint, he informed her that she was free to go. At first, she didn't quite understand. Her release felt too sudden, too unexpected. The guards clarified that while she would face punishment later, she was allowed to leave for the time being. The moment the realization set in, Jung-a's excitement exploded. Without a second thought, she kicked open the door and dashed out, her energy completely renewed. However, just as she was making her escape, a familiar voice called out to her, telling her to wait. She turned around to see Chul standing there. Her usual nickname for him slipped out without hesitation, and she immediately bombarded him with questions. She wanted to know if he was the one who secured her release. Chul, calm as ever, confirmed it. When she asked how, he simply handed her a piece of paper. Curious, Chimnya took the document and began reading. The words on the page didn't make sense at first. As she continued, her eyes widened in shock. She had just been appointed as an elder, and not only that, she was now Chul's official master. As she processed the implications, Chul stood before her, politely asking her to take good care of him. Some time passed, and the scene shifted to Chul preparing himself in his chambers. As he adjusted his outfit, Gawa stood nearby, watching him with a mixture of pride and disbelief. She asked if everything would begin today, to which Chul confirmed. This marked the official start of his journey, a step toward a greater future. Gawa couldn't help but comment on how fast time had passed. Chul, now 13 years old, was about to embark on a crucial phase of his life. Before stepping out, he bid her farewell, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As Chul entered the training grounds, whispers quickly spread among the other students. Many of them recognized him as the 9th child of the family, discussing rumors about his performance in the steel selection ritual and the naming ceremony. Despite his achievements, the prevailing opinion was that he was nothing more than an illegitimate child who had lucked out. He had grown accustomed to hearing the term bastard thrown around, but it didn't make it any less irritating. Among the gathered students, another figure stood out. Chul-hyun. The way people spoke about her was entirely different. She was met with admiration, reinforcing the distinction between those born of the main family and those who were not. As she walked through the crowd, she hesitated for a moment, her eyes landing on Chul. Their gazes met, and Chul greeted her casually. Chul-hyun seemed somewhat nervous as she mentioned the naming ceremony. She reminded him of the moment she expressed disappointment in him, and wondered if it still bothered him. Chul, unbothered, assured her that it wasn't a big deal. Relieved, she laughed, teasing him about not being petty. Before their conversation could continue, a loud voice cut through the chatter, calling for the students' attention. the instructors announced that it was time for class assignments. All named pupils were ordered to gather in front, maintaining their formation as they awaited their designations. The students tensed up, understanding the importance of this moment. The academy divided them into 5 classes based on ability, with the most talented individuals placed in the highest-ranking groups. Being assigned to a lower class meant fewer opportunities, less recognition, and often harsher treatment. Cho Hyun's name was called, and as expected, she was placed in Class 1. The announcement didn't surprise anyone. She had proven her worth multiple times, and her placement was only a confirmation of that fact. Then it was Chul's turn. Unlike the others, he wasn't given a verbal announcement. Instead, they simply handed him his assignment on a sheet of paper. The lack of enthusiasm from the instructor was obvious, and Chul could tell immediately that something was off. As he read his placement, his suspicions were confirmed. Despite his strong performance in the steel selection ritual and the naming ceremony, Chul had been assigned to Class 5, the lowest rank, widely regarded as the academy's trash heap. While this decision was unfair, he wasn't entirely shocked. He knew that the elders and Huayan had orchestrated this, setting him up for failure from the very beginning. Even though many would consider this a setback, Chul saw it differently. This placement meant fewer people would pay attention to him, giving him room to grow without interference. As he came to terms with the situation, an older student approached him, informing him that he would lead him to Class 5's training grounds. Chul agreed and followed him without complaint. As they walked, he noticed Cho Hyun watching him from afar. Unlike the others, who seemed indifferent or pleased about his placement, she looked outright angry. He could tell she wasn't going to stay quiet about this, and if he didn't act quickly, she would definitely cause a scene. Not wanting unnecessary trouble, he gave her a small wave, silently reassuring her that everything was fine before turning back around. Arriving at the training grounds for Class 5, Chul took his place among the other students. Immediately, the atmosphere shifted. The air was thick with despair, as the students around him murmured about how their futures were ruined. Some openly lamented, wondering how they would face their families. The mood was so dismal that Chul couldn't help but think that this class truly lived up to its reputation. But despite their hopelessness, Chul wasn't discouraged. He had already decided no matter how much the elders tried to push him down, he would find his own way to rise. Chul found it difficult to believe that the younger members of the Lee clan had such poor attitudes. Just as he was beginning to take in his surroundings, one of the students called out to him, asking if he was indeed the youngest member of the main family. Without hesitation, he confirmed it, and the boy introduced himself with excitement. His name was Kim Han, the son of a small blacksmithing family that worked closely with the Lee clan. He expressed his admiration and said it was an honor to be in the same class as Chul. Chul, however, had no memory of hearing this boy's name in his past life. He wondered why someone like Han would be so eager to meet him. The boy explained that Chul had always been the center of attention, and he had been looking forward to meeting him for that reason. From his tone, it didn't seem like he was lying. Chul let out a sigh and decided to change the subject. He asked Han how he felt about being placed in Class 5. Han responded that he assumed the instructors had determined his skills were suited for it, but he also acknowledged that the future was unpredictable and things could always change. Chul gave a small smile as he observed the boy's optimistic outlook. He then told Han something that made him even more confused. Before Han could ask what he meant, a new group of students approached them. Among them was a boy named Choi In-ha, who was noticeably older than the others, at 15 years old. The students looked at one another with puzzled expressions before their instructor finally arrived. The man clapped his hands to get their attention, then introduced himself as Yong-ho, the instructor for Class 5. Since there were new members in the group, he decided to skip the usual lecture and instead provide a short overview of what they could expect. Chun listened carefully, evaluating Jong-ho's enthusiasm. In his previous life, he remembered that he had struggled to keep up, to the point that he required private instruction. Despite his past, he could see that Jong-ho was determined to guide the class. Once the overview was complete, Jong-ho placed In-ha in charge, assigning him to teach the new students. In-ha accepted the task, then introduced himself properly. With a hint of embarrassment, he admitted that he had been held back twice, making this his second year as the class leader. This explained why he was older than the rest of the students. Manhwa then suggested that everyone take a seat, as they would now be selecting a class leader. He explained that although they were cadets in training, they would be sent on missions regularly. Because of this, the class leader would serve as a squad captain, making the selection process an important decision. While the instructors provided their training and education, the class leader had full authority over the group. One of the students asked how they would decide on the leader. Manhwa admitted that he wasn't sure how the other classes handled it, but in Class 5, they always determined it through light duels. After fighting each other, they would vote on who seemed best suited for the role. With that, it was time for the duels to begin. Since these were only meant to test their basic skills, the use of mana was strictly forbidden. However, before Manhwa could even finish explaining the rules, Chul interrupted him, clearly displeased. He found the entire process ridiculous. He reminded everyone that they were part of the Lee clan. If they wanted to play school, they should have gone to a normal academy in the safe zone instead. Manhwa tried to reason with him, saying that the duels were meant to provide a peaceful way to determine leadership, but Chul didn't care for that answer. Without another word, he stabbed his wooden practice sword into the ground and challenged everyone at once. If they wanted a leader, they would have to prove they were worthy. Moments later, Chul stood there, panting, having taken down every student who stepped forward. The others watched in stunned silence, unable to process what they had just witnessed. The only one left was Manhwa, who remained seated, speechless. Chul called his name, startling him. Then, he told him to step forward. Manhwa hesitated for a moment before rising to his feet. As they began trading blows, he couldn't help but question why Chul was putting so much effort into this. There was no reward, no grand title. This was nothing more than a cadet squad. To him, it was just a sparring match. But deep down, he knew the answer. He used to be just as determined as Chul. He once had the same drive to win. Over time, he convinced himself that he had matured by accepting reality. But now he realized that he had simply been making excuses. Despite his doubts, he was still determined to fight. However, Chul quickly ended the match with a powerful strike that knocked the sword out of Manhwa's hands. Manhwa stared in shock before clutching his wrist, crying out in pain. Chul sighed and suggested that someone take him to the nurse, but to his surprise, Manhwa refused to back down. With gritted teeth, he picked up his sword using his other hand and swung forward. He wasn't done yet. Manhwa's body was pushed beyond its limits, his broken hand a clear sign of his determination. Chul took note of the fire in his eyes. There was something different about him, but the fight had already been decided. With a swift motion, Chul adjusted his grip, tightening both hands around his sword before delivering a powerful strike straight to Manhwa's stomach. The force sent Manhwa staggering as he coughed violently before collapsing unconscious onto the ground. Without hesitation, Chul instructed the other students to carry him to the nurse. Standing firm, Chul expressed his philosophy. He lived every second with intensity, as if an hour stretched into eternity, and a single hour felt like a year. Life, he claimed, was easy when one compromised. Though he didn't care to explain what that meant, what truly mattered was commitment. If they weren't willing to put everything on the line in every moment, then they would eventually lose it all. For Chul, fighting wasn't just about strength, it was about survival. He would keep going as long as there was breath in his lungs to protect both himself and those around him. He challenged them. Had any of them ever lived with that kind of resolve? To him, that was the essence of true combat. Jong-ho stepped forward, his voice laced with frustration. Chul had gone too far. 4 students had broken bones, and 3 suffered internal injuries. But Chul, still catching his breath, dismissed the concern. If they wanted to endure in the Lee clan, they had to learn to withstand injuries like these. Chul-ho reminded him that many of these cadets came from struggling families. Chul, unimpressed, questioned whether he really needed to explain something even the others understood. Men like Jong-ho were rare, good-hearted and noble, but the cadets were still part of the clan, and if they lost their way, it was Chul's duty to guide them, even if that meant playing the role of the villain. He had a job to do, and he would do it right. Jong-ho clenched his fists but held back his words. The next day, as Chul entered the classroom, he felt the soreness all over his body. He knew he had gone too far yesterday, and it was clear that some of the cadets harbored resentment toward him. Yet, despite their anger, none of them averted their gaze. That alone was reassuring. If they were still as timid as before, there would be no hope for them. As he walked past, he overheard whispers, insults thrown his way. He ignored them until Han greeted him. Han apologized for his poor showing the day before, but Chul brushed it off. They were cadets. Weakness was natural. Han, laughing it off, had only one question. How could he become as strong as Chul? Chul admitted he wasn't skilled enough to teach others yet, but Han had good instincts. He pointed out that Han had managed to evade his feints 3 times in a row the previous day. Instead of focusing on brute strength, Han should refine his natural abilities. His technique would become his greatest weapon. Han took the advice to heart, thanking Chul just as Inha arrived. With his arm wrapped in a cast, Inna was a mess, but he showed up anyway. Chul raised an eyebrow, wondering if Inna could even train in his condition. Inna, unfazed, said that if he had skipped training, Chul would have accused him of overreacting. He was there to avoid a lecture, nothing more. Chul smirked. Han had changed. Jong-ho soon gathered everyone, announcing that 4 cadets were absent due to injuries and 5 others were missing for unknown reasons. That left only 11. He could see the exhaustion in their eyes, the shift in the atmosphere. Yesterday they had been at ease, but now tension filled the air. It was all because of Chul. Originally they had planned to assess their basic skills today, but considering their condition, Jong-ho hesitated. Then, clenching his fist, he decided to go through with the evaluation anyway. Hours passed, and by the end, the cadets were completely drained. With the test complete, Jong-ho announced that their leader would be in charge of training. Chul, just as exhausted, noted that the evaluation alone had taken 10 hours, but there was no time to rest. Whispers spread among the cadets. Jong-ho was acting differently today. Normally, he would have let them rest, but not this time. Then, Chul stepped forward, calling out to them all. He didn't need an introduction. They all knew who he was. As the class leader, he held full authority unless an instructor said otherwise. His training would be tough, and only those willing to endure it should follow him. He wouldn't force anyone to stay if they lacked the will to improve. One of the cadets scoffed at him, calling him arrogant. That was when they were introduced to Kim Ba-zong. Chul stood before the exhausted group of cadets, his expression calm yet firm. He could sense their frustration, the resentment brewing beneath their tired gazes. He didn't care if they hated him. In fact, he welcomed it. If any of them had a problem with his leadership, he offered them a chance. They could challenge him to a duel at any time, and if just one of them managed to land a single hit, he would willingly give up his position as class leader. But until then, they had no choice but to follow his lead. Without wasting any more time, he instructed them to begin sparring against the person standing next to them. He wanted to see who had the will to keep fighting, even when their bodies were pushed to their limits. One by one, the cadets paired up, their exhaustion evident in their sluggish movements. As the hours passed, their numbers dwindled. Many dropped out, unable to keep going, while only 6 of them endured until the end. The rest had given up midway, proving that they still had a long way to go. Seeing their battered expressions, Chul finally called an end to the training. He told them they were dismissed, acknowledging their efforts with a simple "well done" before walking away. As soon as he was out of earshot, the cadets began to murmur amongst themselves. They couldn't believe they were being pushed this hard. They complained about how Chul had them working like dogs, muttering curses under their breath. They didn't even like him, yet here they were, forced to endure his brutal training. Han, who had remained silent until now, finally snapped. Frustrated with himself, he told them to shut up. Chul had been just as exhausted as they were, yet not a single one of them had managed to land a hit on him. That fact alone was enough to make Han realize how much stronger Chul was compared to them. He had no right to complain, when he hadn't even come close to winning. The others turned to Inha, asking for his opinion. They reminded him that they were considered skilled just last year, yet now they felt like they were falling behind. Inha, however, had a different perspective. He admitted that maybe this was the reason he had flunked. When they asked him what he meant, he explained that if he didn't change now, he would never improve. He didn't want to be a failure, and he was ready to give everything he had, even if it meant pushing himself until his body gave out. Taking a deep breath, Inha addressed the group. He reminded them all that they knew exactly what the illegitimate child was trying to accomplish. But before he could continue, he corrected himself, referring to Chul as young master instead. He told them to think about what was happening. This was his last chance to prove himself, and he wasn't going to waste it. If they wanted to get stronger, they needed to stop acting like fools and start taking things seriously. Some time later, Chul found himself in a dimly lit laboratory, connected to a machine as he focused his mana into his hand. Kyungha, a researcher, stood beside him, observing his progress. She urged him to transform it now, pushing him to continue. Chul concentrated, his energy fluctuating as he tried to create aura. However, before he could stabilize it, the form collapsed once again. Frustrated, Kyungha told him to stop. No matter how many times he tried, the aura kept breaking apart. She admitted that she hadn't expected this kind of setback after he reached 3 stars, and without proper records of how mana was used in the past, she was struggling to find a solution. Chul glanced down at Boundless, his sword, contemplating its history. If Boundless had memories of the past, perhaps he could find the answers he needed. However, he couldn't access the next set of memories just yet. He had discovered something unexpected at the library, an ancient knowledge enveloped in an aura as dark as ink, an aura that even monsters feared. A brief history unfolded in his mind. The bravest generals of the nation had tried to defeat this monstrous force, but failed. Only when heroes joined together were they able to seal away the monster and the Thousand Demons Mountain in the north. As a reward for their bravery, the king had granted the heroes a sacred gift, one that deeply moved them. In return, they forged a legendary sword. Boundless, learning about his origins had been invaluable. Chen Ha broke the silence, noting that despite his struggles, Chul was making steady progress. She praised his ability to move forward on his own, confident that he would overcome this hurdle soon. After all, he had already completed both the amplification and transformation techniques, something very few could achieve. He thanked her, but his curiosity remained. What did it truly mean to reach 3 stars? She explained that reaching 3 stars allowed him to use aura skills and enhanced energy, but mastering them would take time. When she noticed how exhausted he looked, she changed the subject, asking about his class training. Chul sighed, brushing it off as unimportant. She offered to help, but when he asked how, she simply laughed, telling him to trust her. Later, Chul realized what she meant, feeling uneasy about her so-called help. Jong-ho stood before the class, announcing that they would have a special lesson on mana arts. He introduced Kyung-ho as an elder and a researcher of their clan, prompting the students to applaud her. Though she found the attention a little embarrassing, she wasted no time getting started. Chul watched her from the side, noting how much better she had become at teaching. After covering the fundamentals, she moved on to the next stage. Declaring that the boring part was over, she promised to show them something exciting. She would teach them a mana improvement method that she had developed through her research, something that could change everything for them. Jung-ho questioned whether the lesson was over, but it turned out that was just the beginning. The instructor urged everyone to sit up straight and pay close attention, emphasizing that she would only demonstrate the technique once. Meanwhile, Chul observed her actions with curiosity. She explained that students from the main lineage receive extra support once training begins, so she decided to do something similar for them. Chul acknowledged her effort, and she assured him that this method should, in theory, double their mana force, which was a significant advantage. Jong-ho then instructed everyone to utilize the new mana technique in duels and to select their partners. Inha stepped forward, choosing Chul as his opponent and making it clear that he wouldn't hold back. Chul welcomed the challenge, giving In-ha the first move. As they exchanged strikes, Kyung-ae watched closely, commenting on Chul's relentless nature, which reminded her of herself. However, she soon overheard the other students whispering among themselves. They expressed resentment toward Chul, believing that although he had faced some discrimination for being an illegitimate child, he was still fundamentally different from them. He was naturally stronger and had already unlocked his abilities, giving him an enormous head start. They felt that no matter how much effort they put in, Chul wouldn't understand their struggles. Kyung-ah confronted them, making her presence known. The students were startled and quickly apologized, realizing she had heard their conversation. She then questioned their assumptions, asking if they truly understood Chul's circumstances. Bazong stepped forward, insisting that Chul was no different from them. He claimed that they too had worked hard, yet Chul belittled their efforts, as if they were meaningless. Since he grew up in a completely different environment, it was only natural that their experiences would diverge. Kyung-ae responded cryptically, implying that they really had no idea what Chul had gone through. If they did, they might see their own lives as relatively easy in comparison. Bazong grew frustrated, feeling as if their struggles were being dismissed once again. Determined to see for himself, he resolved to follow Chul in secret. As the training session ended, Bazong observed Chul closely. He noticed the exhaustion in Chul's movements and thought to himself that despite Chul's claims of being different, he was ultimately just like the rest of them. Other students gathered around Bazong, confirming that he planned to follow Chul. They hesitated, wondering if they were allowed to roam freely within the estate. Bazong reassured them that, as cadets, they had some level of freedom, and besides, Chul wasn't part of a legitimate family, so there was no reason to let him act superior to them. Later that night, Bazong and the others waited outside the research lab, tracking how long Chul had been inside. By the time it reached 9 o'clock, they were growing tired and impatient. Some admitted they just wanted to go home, uncertain about what Chul was even doing inside. Eventually, most of them gave up and left, unable to maintain their curiosity any longer. Finally, after hours of waiting, Chul emerged from the research lab, unaware that he had been under surveillance the entire time. Taishin made it clear that the upcoming test would determine whether someone truly had the potential to be a leader. With that, Butler Choi acknowledged his orders, and Taishin's focus shifted elsewhere. Meanwhile, at the training hall, Chong-ho arrived early in the morning, expecting an empty classroom. Instead, he was met with an unexpected sight. Every single cadet was already there, actively training. It was unusual for them to be up this early, especially on a weekend. Normally, he would have to push them to practice, but this time, they had taken the initiative on their own. As he observed them, one of the cadets called out to him, glad that he had arrived. Jong-ho expressed his surprise at their dedication and took a moment to gather everyone, including those who were absent, as he had an important announcement. He informed them that their first evaluation had been moved up earlier than expected. To prepare for this, they would be given a week-long break in advance. This was an unexpected development, and he advised them to treat this as their final period of rest before the test. Before dismissing them, Young-ho reminded them to at least continue with their basic training during the break, though he knew he didn't need to say it. Their determination was evident, and he trusted them to make the right choices. After acknowledging their efforts so far, he sent them off. Chul found this sudden break strange. The evaluation wasn't supposed to happen so soon. Something about it felt off. As he mulled over the situation, he noticed that some of his fellow cadets hadn't left yet. Han and In-ha, in particular, seemed to be waiting for him. They were curious about what he planned to do during his break. He found their interest in his plans unnecessary. The break was meant for personal time, and what he chose to do with his was his own business. His answer surprised them. Given his strict training habits, they had expected him to use the break as an opportunity to train even harder, possibly forcing them to join him. They had braced themselves for an exhausting schedule, but instead, he simply encouraged them to rest when it was time to rest. Despite his words, Chul was well aware that most of them wouldn't just relax during the break. They were too disciplined for that. Ultimately, he left them to make their own decisions, stating that they could do whatever they wanted until the evaluation. For some reason, this led to them cheering for him, something he didn't quite understand. Meanwhile, in Chongha's research lab, she was deeply immersed in her work when Chul appeared. She was surprised and somewhat annoyed by his presence, believing that instead of resting during his break, he had come to bother her. Her workload was already overwhelming, and she had numerous research projects to complete. Chul, however, suspected that she had been distracted by something on her phone. His guess was correct. She had been watching a drama. He dismissed the conversation and shifted the topic to the upcoming evaluation, wondering if it had been moved up due to orders from his father. She confirmed that the decision came from the main clan through an official document. This revelation made Chul uneasy. If the main clan was directly involved, it meant the test would be much more challenging than expected. His current progress with mana arts had hit a wall, and he needed to improve if he wanted to pass. The only way forward was to unlock more of the boundless memories, but he had yet to figure out what was preventing him from accessing them. He had considered different approaches, hoping that making small changes would help reveal the next memory, but nothing had worked so far. Lost in thought, he accidentally bumped into a stack of papers, sending them scattering across the room. As he picked them up, his eyes landed on one particular document. It described a key difference between ancient and modern martial arts. Unlike contemporary techniques, ancient methods were designed specifically for fighting monsters. This realization struck a chord with him. The split demon technique followed the same principle. It was meant to be excessive, focused purely on destruction. It suddenly all made sense. Without another word, he shot to his feet, declaring that he had figured something out. Ignoring the mess he had made, he rushed out of the lab, leaving papers flying in his wake. Once he reached the training hall, he immediately pulled out Boundless. He needed to visualize an opponent, one larger than himself, something inhuman. His mind crafted the image of a monstrous beast, something far bigger and more powerful than any human. The key to this training was focusing on raw strength and efficiency, abandoning all defensive measures. It wasn't about dodging or blocking, it was about complete and utter destruction. This was the true nature of the split demon technique. He should have realized it sooner. The technique was never meant for fighting humans. It was designed to cut down monsters. As he launched himself forward, the sheer force of his movement shattered the ground beneath him. He activated Split Demon, and in an instant, he sliced through an apocalypse-ranked monster, cleaving it cleanly in half. As the dust settled, he returned to reality, standing amidst the ruins of his training area. It had worked. Now he wondered what new memories Boundless would reveal to him. Without hesitation, he allowed himself to sink back into the world of the sword. When he opened his eyes, he found himself once again in a familiar training hall. It was the same place he had seen when he first obtained Boundless. Yet something was different. The time period had changed. Why did Boundless's memories only shift in this way? He heard movement and turned his head. Standing before him was the same warrior he had seen last time. This person was incredibly fast, faster than Chul had expected, but something else caught his attention. Each time the warrior changed weapons, the aura surrounding him also changed. It wasn't Chul's aura that was shifting, it was Boundless itself adapting. Before he could fully process this, a voice rang out. Someone was speaking about changing the way techniques were performed. Chul was startled but quickly concealed himself behind a pillar, observing the conversation. The two figures discussed a technique. One of them suggested a name, 1,000 Forms. The other warrior seemed to consider it before giving a small nod. Chul remained hidden, watching intently. However, the conversation soon took a sharp turn. The two warriors drew their weapons, ready for battle. The air was thick with tension as their blades clashed, sending shockwaves through the space. Chul's heart pounded as he continued to watch. Then, something clicked in his mind. Based on their hair and eye colors, he recognized one of them. This man was a direct descendant of the Lee clan. As the battle raged on, Chul's understanding of Boundless and its memories deepened. He was one step closer to unraveling the truth behind his own potential.